Chapter 1, The Rooftop Idea. Carlton Evans had always believed that life, much like the plants he nurtured, thrived best when given the right conditions. For him, those conditions were routine, purpose, and a quiet sense of progress. Hydroponics was more than a job, it was a calling. Every day at the agricultural research company felt like a small victory against barren soil and harsh climates. He loved the science, the precision, and the promise that even the most inhospitable places could bloom with life. But lately, his own life felt like an empty greenhouse, functional, orderly, and quietly lonely. It had been 2 years since his last relationship ended. He remembered the conversation vividly, not because it was dramatic, but because it was so considerate. She had waited until after his 30th birthday to break the news. "I didn't want to ruin your day," she'd said, and he had thanked her for that small mercy. No anger, no bitterness, just the quiet understanding that not every frog turns into a prince. His father's words echoed in his mind even now. Believe what people do, not what they say. It had served him well, even if it left him cautious. Thanksgiving had come and gone without much fanfare, but a week later, grief arrived like an unexpected frost. His grandfather passed away in his sleep, a gentle exit for a man who had lived with quiet strength. Carlton worried less about himself and more about his grandmother. For the first time since she was 19, she was physically alone. Not unloved, never that, but alone in the apartment building she and his grandfather had owned for 20 years. Carlton made a promise to himself. She would not feel abandoned. He started visiting her every evening after work, sharing dinner, fixing leaky faucets, and answering calls from tenants. The building was old, tired, and half empty. Over half the apartments needed repairs, painting, and general refurbishing. Bills and taxes loomed like storm clouds. Carlton could see the writing on the wall. If nothing changed, his grandmother would lose her home and livelihood. That wasn't going to happen. Not on his watch. The idea came to him on a cold December afternoon, standing on the flat roof of the building with a wrench in hand, staring at the stubborn air conditioning unit. He wiped his brow, even though the chill didn't warrant it, and looked around. The roof stretched wide and empty, a gray desert of tar and vents, 20,000 square feet of wasted potential. And then, like sunlight breaking through clouds, he saw it. A greenhouse, not just any greenhouse, a sprawling, enclosed ecosystem that would transform the roof into a living paradise. He pictured rows of fresh vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Flowers were important. They would feed the honeybees he planned to house in small hives, openings just big enough for bees but too small for birds. Butterflies would flutter among blossoms, a living sanctuary of color and joy. Rainwater collectors would feed the hydroponic systems, reducing costs and waste. It would be self-sufficient, sustainable, and beautiful. In the center, he imagined cafe-style tables for residents, a rooftop courtyard where neighbors could gather, laugh, and share meals. He even thought about adding a pottery wheel and kiln for handmade flower pots. Every detail crystallized in his mind. A cooperative garden where residents could claim plots, grow their own produce, and contribute to the upkeep. Anything extra would be sold at a small vegetable stand out front, funding seeds, soil, and supplies. Fresh honey, vegetables, and handmade pottery. A trifecta of charm and practicality. Carlton felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't just a project. It was a lifeline for his grandmother, for the building, and maybe for himself. 3 days later, he sat across from his grandmother at her kitchen table, a stack of sketches and spreadsheets spread between them. She listened quietly as he explained the plan, her eyes soft with pride and something else. "Hope, you've thought this through," she said finally, tapping a finger on the sketch of the greenhouse. "It's beautiful." Carlton smiled, a little sheepishly. "It's practical too, and I think we should change how we rent out the apartments. Target single parents, men or women with custody of their kids. Safe, affordable housing is hard to find. We can make this place a haven." His grandmother's eyes glistened. "Your grandfather would have loved this." Carlton swallowed the lump in his throat. "Then let's do it." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You have my blessing." That night, Carlton lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind buzzing like the bees he planned to house. For the first time in months, he felt something stirring inside him, a sense of purpose that went beyond work, beyond routine. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. This rooftop was going to bloom. And maybe, just maybe, so would he. Chapter 2, Plans and Permits. Carlton Evans had never considered himself a dreamer. He was a planner, a man who believed in blueprints and budgets, not castles in the sky. But as he stood in the elevator of his grandmother's building, clutching a folder thick with sketches and cost estimates, he felt like a man about to pitch a miracle. The elevator groaned its way up to the 3rd floor, stopping briefly at the 2nd. The doors slid open, and Carlton was greeted by the sound of a child laughing, a bright, unfiltered giggle that bounced down the hallway like sunlight. A woman appeared, juggling grocery bags and a toddler who clung to her hip like a koala. She was striking in a way that caught him off guard, not because of glamour but because of warmth. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, a few strands escaping like rebels, and her smile was quick and apologetic. "Oh, sorry," she said, shifting the bags to one arm. "Is this going up?" Carlton blinked, then remembered how elevators worked. Yeah, 3rd floor. Perfect. She stepped in, the toddler eyeing Carlton with unabashed curiosity. Say hi, Max. Max grinned, revealing a gap where a baby tooth had recently vacated. Hi. Carlton smiled back. Hey, buddy. The woman set the bags down with a sigh. I swear, these groceries multiply on the walk from the car. Carlton chuckled. They do that. Science hasn't explained it yet. She laughed, a genuine, melodic sound that made something in Carlton's chest shift. I'm Harper, by the way. Just moved in last week. Carlton, he said, offering a hand. Welcome to the building. Her handshake was firm, confident. Thanks, so far so good. Though the oven in my apartment seems to think it's a decorative piece. Carlton winced. I'll take a look. Maintenance is sort of my side gig these days. Side gig? Harper raised an eyebrow. He hesitated, then smiled. Long story, but if you need help, I'm around. The elevator dinged, and Harper gathered her bags. Appreciate it, Carlton. Really. As she stepped out, Carlton felt a strange tug, a mix of curiosity and something softer, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He shook it off. He had a greenhouse to build, not whatever that was. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, emails, and paperwork. Permits were a labyrinth, but Carlton navigated them with quiet determination. He spent his lunch breaks on hold with city offices, his evenings drafting proposals. Every time he hit a snag, zoning restrictions, structural load requirements, he reminded himself why he was doing this. For his grandmother, for the building, for the vision that had taken root in his mind like a stubborn seed. And maybe, just maybe, for the possibility of something new. One evening, Carlton found himself back on the roof, measuring distances under a sky streaked with winter pink. The air was sharp, his breath visible in the fading light. He was so focused on his tape measure that he didn't hear the footsteps until a voice spoke behind him. Looks like you're planning a rooftop empire. Carlton turned, startled, to see Harper standing there, hands tucked into the pockets of a worn denim jacket. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her eyes bright with curiosity. Not an empire, Carlton said, smiling. Just a garden. A garden. She stepped closer, peering at his sketches spread across a folding table. Wow, this is ambitious. Maybe, he admitted, but I think it could work. Harper studied the drawings, her brow furrowed in concentration. Vegetables, herbs, flowers, bees? You're really going all in. Carlton shrugged. If you're going to dream, might as well dream big. She looked up, and for a moment their eyes held. I like that. The wind tugged at her hair, and Carlton felt an impulse, unexpected and irrational, to reach out and smooth the stray strands. He didn't, of course. Instead, he cleared his throat and gestured to the plans. It's going to take a lot of work, but if it means saving the building and giving people something beautiful, it's worth it. Harper smiled, slow and genuine. If you need an extra pair of hands, I'm pretty good with plants. Or at least, I haven't killed any lately. Carlton laughed, the sound echoing across the empty roof. I'll keep that in mind. As Harper turned to leave, Carlton watched her go, a thought blooming quietly in his mind. Maybe this garden wasn't the only thing about to grow. Chapter 3: Breaking Ground. The first day of construction felt like the first day of spring. Cold, messy, and full of promise. Carlton stood on the rooftop at dawn, bundled in a thick jacket, surveying the expanse of gray tar that would soon transform into a lush oasis. The city skyline stretched beyond the edges of the building, a jagged silhouette against a pale winter sky. He inhaled deeply, the air sharp and clean, and felt the familiar hum of anticipation that always came before a big project. He wasn't alone for long. Morning, Rooftop Emperor, a voice called out, teasing and warm. Carlton turned to see Harper climbing the last rung of the metal ladder, her breath puffing in little clouds. She wore a knit beanie and gloves that looked like they had seen better days, and she carried a thermos like a badge of honor. Emperor. Carlton raised an eyebrow. Well, you're about to rule over 20,000 square feet of greenery, Harper said, grinning. Seems fitting. Carlton chuckled. I'll settle for chief gardener. Fair enough. She handed him the thermos. Coffee. Figured you'd need it. He accepted it gratefully. You didn't have to. I wanted to, she said simply, and for a moment, the wind seemed to pause between them. The rooftop was a hive of activity by mid-morning. Carlton had hired a small crew, 2 men and a woman who worked fast and laughed often. They hauled lumber, measured beams, and argued cheerfully about the best way to anchor the greenhouse frame. Carlton moved among them like a conductor, checking angles, tightening bolts, and answering questions. Harper stayed, rolling up her sleeves and diving in without hesitation. She held boards steady, fetched tools, and cracked jokes that made the crew snort with laughter. At one point, when a gust of wind sent a stack of plastic sheeting tumbling across the roof, Harper sprinted after it, her beanie flying off like a startled bird. Carlton watched her chase the runaway sheets, hair streaming behind her, and felt something unexpected, a flicker of joy, sharp and bright. You okay? He called when she returned, breathless and triumphant, clutching the rescued plastic. Heroic and slightly winded, she said, grinning. But okay. Carlton laughed, and the sound felt good, like sunlight breaking through clouds. By late afternoon, the skeletal frame of the greenhouse stood proudly against the skyline, a promise of what was to come. Carlton wiped sweat from his brow, even though the air was cold, and surveyed the progress with quiet satisfaction. "This is really happening," Harper said, stepping up beside him. Her cheeks were pink from the wind, her eyes bright. "You weren't kidding about dreaming big." Carlton glanced at her, then back at the frame. "Big dreams are the only kind worth having." She smiled, and for a moment, the rooftop felt warmer than it had all day. That night, Carlton returned to his apartment exhausted but exhilarated. He showered, changed into sweats, and collapsed onto the couch with a notebook. He started jotting down ideas, plant rotations, water systems, seating arrangements. But his mind kept drifting, unbidden, to Harper. The way she laughed, the way she didn't hesitate to help, the way her presence made the rooftop feel less like a project and more like something alive. Carlton closed the notebook and stared at the ceiling, his thoughts tangled like vines. He wasn't looking for anything. He wasn't ready for anything. And yet, maybe life, like hydroponics, didn't need soil to grow. Maybe it just needed the right conditions. Chapter 4: Seeds of Change. The greenhouse was no longer just a skeleton of beams and bolts. It was beginning to breathe. By mid-January, the transparent panels were in place, sealing the rooftop in a cocoon of glass and steel. Inside, the air was warmer, softer, carrying the faint scent of soil and promise. Carlton stood in the center, hands on his hips, surveying the rows of planters he'd arranged like soldiers awaiting orders. The irrigation system gleamed under the pale winter sun, a network of tubes and reservoirs ready to deliver life. He felt a surge of pride and a flicker of nerves. This was the point of no return. Seeds would go in today, the first step toward turning theory into reality. "Looks like a jungle waiting to happen," Harper said, stepping through the greenhouse door with a grin. She wore a faded sweatshirt and jeans dusted with flour, as if she'd been baking before deciding to join him. Her hair was pulled back, but a few strands framed her face in a way that made Carlton's pulse skip. "Not a jungle," Carlton corrected, smiling. "A controlled ecosystem." "Controlled," Harper repeated, eyeing the rows of planters. "You sound like a man who's never met a zucchini plant." Carlton laughed. "Fair point." She set down a tray of seedlings, tiny green shoots nestled in biodegradable cups. "Thought you could use these. Basil, mint, and something I forgot to label. Surprise herbs," Carlton said, amused. "Adds excitement." "Exactly." Harper knelt beside a planter, her movements easy and confident. "So, what's first?" Carlton joined her, kneeling on the opposite side. "We start with the herbs and leafy greens. They're quick growers, good morale boosters." "Morale boosters," Harper echoed, smiling. "You make it sound like we're running a military operation." "In a way, we are," Carlton said, his tone playful. "Against empty rooftops and overpriced produce." Harper laughed, and the sound warmed the space more than the sun filtering through the glass. They worked side by side, planting seedlings and adjusting irrigation lines. Conversation flowed easily, about favorite foods, childhood gardens, and the absurdity of city parking. Carlton found himself laughing more than he had in months, the kind of laughter that loosened knots he didn't know he'd been carrying. Then came the bees. Carlton had ordered 2 small hives, planning to introduce them gradually. He'd read every manual, watched every tutorial. He was ready, or so he thought. The moment he lifted the first hive lid, a cloud of bees erupted like confetti at a parade. "Whoa!" Harper yelped, ducking instinctively as the bees swirled around them. "Don't sweat," Carlton said quickly, holding his hands up like a referee. "They're just exploring. Exploring my hair," Harper exclaimed, backing toward the door as a bee landed on her beanie. "Carlton, I like nature, but this is a little too immersive." Carlton bit back a laugh, trying to sound reassuring. "They'll settle down. Just stay calm." "Easy for you to say." Harper darted behind a planter, peeking out like a soldier in enemy territory. "One of them is giving me the stink eye." Carlton couldn't help it. He laughed, full and unrestrained. "Bees don't have stink eyes. Tell that to this guy." Harper pointed dramatically at a bee hovering near her shoulder. Eventually, the bees calmed, returning to their hive with the dignity of creatures who had made their point. Harper emerged from her hiding spot, hair slightly mussed, cheeks flushed. "Well," she said, brushing off her sweatshirt, "that was bonding." Carlton grinned. "With the bees or with me?" Harper tilted her head, a smile tugging at her lips. "Both, maybe." The words hung in the air, light but charged, and Carlton felt something shift, a subtle click, like a seed finding its place in soil. By sunset, the greenhouse was alive with green shoots and quiet hums. Carlton stood at the door, watching Harper rinse her hands at the outdoor sink, her laughter still echoing in his ears. He felt tired, yes, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that came from building something that mattered. And as Harper turned, catching his gaze with a smile that lingered just a beat too long, Carlton wondered if this garden was about to grow more than vegetables. Chapter 5: Dinner with Grandma. Carlton Evans believed in keeping promises, and tonight was no exception. He arrived at his grandmother's apartment just after 6, carrying a paper bag that smelled faintly of roasted chicken and herbs. The hallway was quiet, save for the hum of the radiator and the distant sound of a television from one of the occupied units. He knocked gently, and the door opened almost immediately. "Carlton," his grandmother said, her voice warm but tinged with fatigue. She was a small woman, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her eyes sharp despite the soft wrinkles framing them. "You didn't have to bring dinner." "I wanted to," Carlton said, stepping inside. "Besides, you've been feeding me since I was born. I owe you a few meals." She smiled, the kind of smile that carried decades of love. "Set it on the table. I'll get plates." The apartment smelled faintly of lavender and old books, a comforting scent that wrapped around Carlton like a familiar quilt. He unpacked the food while his grandmother fetched plates and silverware, moving with the slow grace of someone who had learned to pace herself. They sat down together, the table small but cozy, and for a while conversation stayed light, about the weather, the stubborn elevator, and the progress on the greenhouse. Carlton described the frame, the irrigation system, and the first seedlings with a quiet pride that made his grandmother's eyes soften. "You've always had a good head for ideas," she said, spooning mashed potatoes onto her plate, "and a good heart for people." Carlton smiled, a little embarrassed. "I just want to make things better." "You are," she said simply. Then, after a pause, she added, "But what about making things better for yourself?" Carlton froze, his fork hovering midair. "What do you mean?" His grandmother gave him a look, the kind that could peel back layers of pretense with surgical precision. "You've been working hard, visiting me, fixing this building, planning that garden. But when was the last time you did something just for you?" Carlton hesitated, then shrugged. "I like my work, and the greenhouse, it's important." "It is," she agreed. "But so is your happiness." Carlton stared at his plate, her words settling like seeds in soil. He thought about Harper, her laughter, her easy confidence, the way she chased plastic sheets across the roof like a warrior in sneakers. He felt a flicker of something he didn't want to name. "I'm fine," he said finally, though the words sounded thin even to his own ears. His grandmother reached across the table and touched his hand, her grip gentle but firm. "Carlton, you're a good man. But good men need more than projects. They need people." He swallowed, the lump in his throat stubborn. "I'm not looking for anything." "Maybe not," she said, her eyes kind. "But sometimes, the best things find you when you're not looking." Carlton didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he focused on his chicken, chewing slowly, his mind tangled with thoughts he wasn't ready to untangle. Later, as he walked home under a sky dusted with stars, his grandmother's words echoed in his head. "Good men need more than projects. They need people." He thought about Harper again, her smile, her voice, the way she'd said both, maybe, when he teased her about bonding. Carlton shoved his hands into his pockets, his breath fogging in the cold air. He wasn't ready for anything. He wasn't looking for anything. But maybe, just maybe, something was looking for him. Chapter 6, The Cooperative Dream. Carlton Evans had never been much of a salesman. He preferred facts to flash, substance to spectacle. But tonight, as he stood in the modest community room on the first floor of his grandmother's building, he felt like a man about to pitch the future. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old linoleum. A folding table served as his podium, covered with sketches of the rooftop greenhouse, cost breakdowns, and a neat stack of flyers titled, "The Rooftop Garden Cooperative Grow Together." Carlton adjusted his collar, glanced at the clock, and exhaled slowly. One by one, the tenants trickled in, some curious, some skeptical, all bundled against the January chill. Carlton recognized most of them from his maintenance rounds. Mrs. Delgado from 1B, who had a voice like a foghorn and an opinion on everything. The quiet young man from 2C who always wore headphones. And, of course, Harper, who arrived balancing a plate of cookies like a peace offering. "Thought we could use snacks," she said, flashing him a grin as she set the plate down. "Bribery works." Carlton smiled, grateful for the assist. "Thanks." Mrs. Delgado plopped into a chair with a dramatic sigh. "This better not be about raising rent. I already told your grandmother. If you raise it one more time, I'm moving to Florida and taking my cat with me." Carlton held up his hands. "No rent hikes, promise." "Good," Mrs. Delgado said, folding her arms. "Because Mr. Whiskers doesn't like change." Carlton bit back a smile. "Noted." When everyone had settled, Carlton cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming. I know it's cold, and I appreciate your time. I wanted to share an idea, something that could make this building better for all of us." He gestured to the sketches, his voice steady but warm. "The rooftop is empty space right now, but it doesn't have to be. I'm building a greenhouse, a place where we can grow fresh vegetables, herbs, even flowers. It'll be sustainable, using rainwater collectors and hydroponic systems. And it won't just be a garden, it'll be a community space. Tables for gatherings, maybe even a pottery station." A murmur rippled through the room, curiosity mixed with cautious optimism. Carlton continued, "Here's the best part. It's a cooperative. If you want to join, your cost is your help. Each member gets a plot to grow what they like. Anything extra, we'll sell at a small stand out front. That money goes back into seeds, soil, and supplies. Fresh food, lower costs, and a chance to make this building feel like home. He paused, scanning the room. Questions. Mrs. Delgado raised a hand like a traffic cop. Do we get to grow tomatoes? Because if I can't have tomatoes, I'm out. Carlton smiled. Tomatoes are encouraged. Then I'm in, she declared, as if signing a treaty. The young man in headphones spoke up, surprising everyone. Could we do strawberries? My kid loves strawberries. Absolutely, Carlton said, his chest warming. Strawberries, tomatoes, basil, whatever fits the space. Harper leaned forward, her eyes bright. This is amazing, Carlton. Seriously, I'm in. And if you need help organizing, I'm your girl. Her enthusiasm was like sunlight breaking through clouds, and Carlton felt a flicker of gratitude. And something else, something softer. By the end of the meeting, half the room had signed up, and the other half promised to think about it. Carlton packed up his sketches, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. As the tenants filed out, Harper lingered, sliding the last cookie onto a napkin. You did great, she said, her voice low and warm. You made them believe. Carlton shrugged, smiling. It's easy to believe in something good. Harper tilted her head, her gaze steady. Yeah, it is. For a moment, the room felt smaller, quieter, charged with something unspoken. Then Harper broke the spell with a grin. Now, about those bees. Carlton laughed, the sound echoing off the linoleum walls. Don't worry, they're on their best behavior. Good, Harper said, heading for the door. Because I'm not running rooftop sprints again. Carlton watched her go, the smile lingering on his lips. The cooperative was taking root. And maybe, just maybe, so was something else. Chapter 7, Rain and Revelations. The storm rolled in without warning. Carlton had been on the rooftop since late afternoon, adjusting the irrigation lines and checking the seal on the greenhouse panels. The sky had been clear then. A pale winter blue stretched wide and calm. But now, as dusk settled, the horizon churned with bruised clouds, heavy and fast-moving. The first raindrops splattered against the glass like impatient fingers. Of course, Carlton muttered, tightening the last bolt on a support beam. Because why wouldn't the weather app lie? The wind picked up, rattling the greenhouse panels with a hollow clatter. Carlton scanned the roof, his pulse quickening. The structure was strong, but the storm was stronger than he'd anticipated. If the panels weren't secured, the whole thing could turn into a very expensive kite. He was halfway to the storage shed for extra clamps when the door to the stairwell banged open. Carlton! Harper's voice cut through the wind, sharp with urgency. She emerged in a swirl of rain and determination, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her jacket soaked. I saw the forecast, thought you might need help. Carlton blinked, startled. Harper, you didn't have to. Save it, she said, already grabbing a coil of rope from the shed. What's the plan? For a moment, Carlton just stared at her. This woman who had sprinted up 3 flights in a storm without hesitation. Then he snapped into motion. We need to reinforce the west panels. If the wind gets under them, they'll rip right off. Got it, Harper said, her voice steady despite the rain pelting down. She followed him into the greenhouse, boots splashing through puddles forming on the concrete floor. They worked fast, moving like a 2-person rescue team. Carlton secured clamps while Harper tied ropes with quick, sure knots. The wind howled through the gaps, and rain streaked the glass in frantic patterns. At one point, a gust slammed the door open, sending a stack of empty planters skittering across the floor like startled crabs. Great, Harper muttered, chasing after them. Because what's a storm without airborne pottery? Carlton laughed, short, breathless, but real. You're earning hazard pay tonight. Add cookies to my paycheck, Harper shot back, grinning despite the chaos. By the time the last panel was secured, they were both drenched, their clothes clinging like second skins. The storm raged outside, but inside the greenhouse, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of wet soil. Carlton sank onto an overturned crate, wiping rain from his face. Harper dropped beside him, her breath coming in quick bursts. Well, she said, pushing damp hair out of her eyes. That was intense. Carlton chuckled, his chest still tight from adrenaline. You didn't have to come up here. I wanted to, Harper said simply, her voice softer now. You shouldn't have to do this alone. The words landed like a weight and a bomb all at once. Carlton looked at her, really looked at her. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, her smile tired but unwavering. Something inside him shifted, deep and undeniable. Thank you, he said. And it wasn't just for the storm. Harper held his gaze, and for a moment, the world outside, the rain, the wind, the chaos, faded to a distant hum. There was only the greenhouse, the soft glow of the overhead lights, and the quiet thrum of something new taking root. Then Harper broke the silence with a grin. So, when do we get the butterflies? Because I feel like they'd really complete the vibe. Carlton laughed, the sound rich and unguarded. Soon, he said. Very soon. They stayed until the storm eased, checking every panel twice before heading down. Carlton walked Harper to her door, his jacket still dripping, his heart still racing, but not from the wind this time. As he turned to leave, Harper called after him. Hey, Carlton. He glanced back. Yeah. She smiled, slow and warm. Next time. Maybe let me know before the rooftop turns into a disaster movie. Carlton grinned. Deal. And as he walked down the hall, he realized something. The storm had passed, but the feeling in his chest? That was just beginning. Chapter 8, The First Harvest. By late February, the rooftop greenhouse was no longer a dream. It was a living, breathing reality. Rows of vibrant greens stretched under the glass canopy, their leaves glistening with droplets from the irrigation system. Basil and mint perfumed the air, mingling with the earthy scent of soil. Tomato vines climbed their trellises like eager acrobats, and the strawberry plants were dotted with tiny white blossoms, promising sweetness to come. Even the bees seemed content, humming lazily around their hives like satisfied patrons at a cafe. Carlton stood in the center of it all, hands on his hips, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: pride without reservation. This wasn't just a project, it was a sanctuary. For his grandmother, for the tenants, for himself. And tonight it would become something more. The idea for the dinner had come to him while harvesting the first batch of lettuce and herbs. Why not celebrate? A rooftop meal, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, would mark the beginning of something special. He'd spent the afternoon setting up folding tables in the greenhouse's central space, draping them with simple white cloths. Strings of warm lights zigzagged overhead, casting a golden glow that softened the glass walls and made the space feel almost magical. By 6 o'clock, the tenants began to arrive, carrying dishes and laughter. Mrs. Delgado swept in first, wearing a floral apron and brandishing a bowl of what she declared the best tomato salad this side of Naples. Behind her came the headphone guy, whose name, Carlton finally learned, was Marcus, carrying a tray of strawberry shortcakes that looked suspiciously store-bought. He confessed with a sheepish grin, "I'm better at eating than baking." Carlton chuckled. "You're in the right place." Harper arrived last, balancing a casserole dish and a bottle of wine. Her hair was loose tonight, tumbling over her shoulders in waves that caught the light. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, but something about her, maybe the ease in her smile, maybe the spark in her eyes, made Carlton's breath hitch. "Hope you like lasagna," she said, setting the dish on the table. "It's my grandmother's recipe." "Well, mostly. Lasagna sounds perfect," Carlton replied, his voice steadier than he felt. Dinner was a riot of flavors and voices. The greenhouse buzzed with conversation, laughter bouncing off the glass walls like music. Mrs. Delgado held court at one end of the table, regaling everyone with stories about her cat's psychic abilities. Marcus confessed he joined the co-op mainly to impress his 6-year-old daughter, who now believed he was a plant wizard. Someone brought up the bees, and Harper shot Carlton a look that made him grin. "Still behaving?" she teased, sipping her wine. "Model citizens," Carlton said. "No rooftop sprints required." "Good," Harper replied, her smile lingering just a beat too long. As the evening wore on, Carlton found himself stealing glances at Harper, at the way she laughed with the tenants, at the way her hands moved when she spoke, animated and alive. He felt a pull, quiet but insistent, like gravity. And when Harper caught his gaze across the table, her eyes warm and steady, the pull became something undeniable. After dessert, as the tenants drifted out with full bellies and cheerful goodbyes, Harper stayed behind to help clear plates. They worked in companionable silence for a while, stacking dishes and wiping tables. Then, as Carlton reached for a stray glass, his hand brushed hers. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt through him, sharp and electric. Harper froze, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, the world narrowed to that single point of touch. "Carlton," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the hum of the greenhouse lights. He swallowed, his throat dry. "Yeah." Her lips curved into a smile, small, knowing, and full of something that made his pulse race. "This was a good night." Carlton nodded, his voice low. "Yeah, it was." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of possibility, of questions, of something blooming quietly between them. Later, as Carlton locked up the greenhouse and watched Harper disappear down the stairwell, he felt the weight of his grandmother's words again. Good men need more than projects. They need people. And for the first time, Carlton wondered if he was ready to believe her. Chapter 9, A Misunderstanding. Carlton Evans prided himself on being rational. He believed in facts, in evidence, in not jumping to conclusions. But tonight, as he stood in the dim hallway outside Harper's apartment, clutching a folder of updated co-op schedules, rationality was about to take a back seat. He hadn't meant to overhear. He'd knocked once, lightly, and when there was no answer, he'd started to turn away. That's when he heard her voice, muffled but clear enough through the slightly ajar door. "I don't know, Mom," Harper was saying, her tone exasperated. "It's not like I'm planning to stay here forever." Carlton froze, the words hitting like a sudden frost. Not planning to stay here forever. His stomach tightened. Was she leaving? Moving out? After everything, the greenhouse, the co-op, the laughter, they were just temporary? He shifted his weight, debating whether to knock again or retreat quietly. Before he could decide, Harper spoke again, her voice softer now. "Yes, I know he's nice," she said, and Carlton's pulse jumped. "But that's not the point. I'm not looking for anything serious." The words landed like a stone in his chest. Not looking for anything serious. Carlton felt something inside him deflate, slow and heavy. He didn't know what he'd expected. He wasn't even sure what he wanted. But hearing that made the air feel colder, the hallway narrower. He stepped back, careful not to make a sound, and walked away, the folder limp in his hand. The next few days were awkward. Carlton avoided Harper without meaning to. He was polite, professional, but distant, answering her questions about irrigation schedules with clipped efficiency, sidestepping her jokes with tight smiles. Harper noticed, of course. Her brow furrowed when he brushed past her in the stairwell, her voice tentative when she asked if everything was okay. Fine, Carlton said too quickly. Just busy. Busy was a lie. He was restless, distracted, replaying her words in his head like a broken record, not looking for anything serious. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself he was fine. He told himself a lot of things. None of them felt true. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening, when Harper cornered him in the greenhouse. She stood by the basil planter, arms crossed, eyes sharp with frustration. Okay, she said, her voice firm. What's going on? Carlton blinked, feigning ignorance. What do you mean? I mean, Harper said, stepping closer. You've been acting weird for days. Did I do something? Say something? Carlton hesitated, then exhaled, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. I overheard you, talking to your mom, about not staying, and not wanting anything serious. Harper stared at him, stunned. Then, to Carlton's surprise, she laughed, a short, incredulous sound. Oh my God, Carlton. He frowned. What? That conversation, Harper said, shaking her head, was about my job. My job, Carlton. I told her I wasn't planning to stay at the bakery forever. And the not serious part? I was talking about sourdough classes. Sourdough. I'm not ready to commit to a weekly bread cult. Carlton blinked, the weight in his chest evaporating so fast it left him dizzy. Bread cult. Harper grinned, her eyes dancing. It's a thing. Don't ask. For a moment silence stretched between them. Then Carlton laughed, full and unguarded, the sound echoing off the glass walls. Harper joined in, her laughter bright and warm, and the tension that had knotted between them unraveled like a loose thread. When the laughter faded, Harper stepped closer, her voice softer now. For the record, she said, her gaze steady, I'm not planning to leave anytime soon. And as for serious things, she let the words hang, a smile tugging at her lips. Maybe I'm not ruling them out. Carlton's breath caught, his heart thudding like a drum. He wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the words tangled in his throat. Harper saved him with a grin. Now, help me harvest this basil before it stages a coup. Carlton laughed again, relief flooding his veins like sunlight. The misunderstanding was cleared. The air was warm again. And maybe, just maybe, the ground was ready for something new to grow. Chapter 10, Clearing the Air. The greenhouse was quiet tonight, bathed in the soft glow of string lights that shimmered against the glass walls. Outside, the city hummed in muted tones, but up here, it felt like another world. A world Carlton Evans had built with his own hands. A world that had become more than he ever imagined. And yet, his chest was tight. The misunderstanding about Harper's conversation had been cleared days ago, but the words she'd left hanging, maybe I'm not ruling them out, had taken root in his mind like a stubborn vine. He'd replayed them over and over, wondering if he'd imagined the warmth in her voice, the way her eyes had lingered on his. Tonight, he decided he couldn't keep wondering. Harper was already there when he arrived, kneeling by the strawberry planter, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. She looked up as he stepped inside, her smile easy and bright. Hey, she said. You're late. The basil was starting to gossip about you. Carlton chuckled, his nerves loosening just a fraction. Sorry. Had to fix a leak in 2B. Mrs. Delgado threatened to call the mayor. Sounds about right, Harper said, standing and brushing soil from her hands. So, what's up? You look serious. Carlton hesitated, then exhaled slowly. Can we talk? Harper's smile softened. Sure. He led her to the small seating area in the center of the greenhouse, a circle of mismatched chairs around a low table. They sat, the hum of the irrigation system filling the silence like a gentle heartbeat. Carlton stared at his hands for a moment, then looked up, meeting her gaze. I owe you an apology. For assuming things. For pulling back. Harper tilted her head, her expression calm but curious. You were hurt, she said simply. I get it. I was, Carlton admitted. But not because of the job thing. Or the bread cult. He smiled faintly, and Harper laughed, the sound easing the tension between them. It was because, care, more than I expected to. Harper's laughter faded, replaced by something softer. Carlton, I'm not great at this, he said, his voice low but steady. Relationships, feelings. I've spent the last few years keeping my life neat and controlled. Like a hydroponic system, everything measured, everything predictable. But then you showed up, and suddenly, he gestured around the greenhouse, his hands helpless. Nothing feels predictable anymore. Harper was quiet for a moment, her eyes searching his. Then she smiled, a slow, warm smile that made his pulse race. You know, she said softly, I wasn't looking for anything either. But sometimes, the best things aren't planned. Carlton swallowed, his throat tight. So, what does that mean? Harper leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees, her gaze steady and bright. It means, she said, her voice like sunlight breaking through clouds, I'm not ruling you out either. The words landed like rain on parched soil, soft, steady, life-giving. Carlton felt something bloom inside him, wild and unstoppable. He laughed then, a quiet, breathless laugh that made Harper smile wider. You have no idea how relieved I am. Oh, I think I do, Harper teased, her eyes dancing. You looked like a man about to confess to a felony. Carlton grinned, the tension melting away. Only if loving basil counts. Harper laughed, and the sound filled the greenhouse like music. For a moment, they just sat there, smiling like fools, the air thick with possibility. Then Harper stood, offering her hand. Come on, Chief Gardener. Help me water these rebels before they stage a coup. Carlton took her hand, his fingers curling around hers, and felt the spark, bright, undeniable, and full of promise. Chapter 11 Rooftop Confession. The rooftop had never looked more beautiful. It was early March, and the greenhouse glowed like a jewel against the twilight sky. Strings of lights shimmered overhead, casting warm halos across rows of thriving plants. The air was rich with the scent of basil and mint, mingled with the faint sweetness of strawberry blossoms. Outside, the city buzzed in distant hums, but up here, it felt like the world had paused, just for them. Carlton Evans stood near the center table, his heart thudding like a drum. He'd rehearsed this moment in his head a dozen times, each version ending with him sounding like a complete idiot. But tonight, he wasn't going to overthink. Tonight, he was going to speak. Harper was there already, adjusting a tray of seedlings with the easy grace that had become second nature to her. She looked up as he approached, her smile soft and warm. Hey, she said. You look intense. Did the basil unionize? Carlton laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. Not yet, but give them time. Harper grinned, her eyes dancing. So, what's up? Carlton took a breath, steadying himself. I need to tell you something. Her smile faltered just slightly, curiosity flickering in her gaze. Okay. He gestured around the greenhouse, his voice low but sure. When I started this project, it was about saving the building, helping my grandmother, creating something good. And it is all of that. But somewhere along the way, he paused, searching for words that didn't sound like a bad greeting card. It became about more than that. Harper tilted her head, her expression softening. More. Carlton nodded, his throat tight. You. It became about you. The silence that followed was thick, charged, alive. Harper blinked, her lips parting slightly, and Carlton rushed on before doubt could choke him. I didn't plan this, he said, his voice rough with honesty. I wasn't looking for anything. But then you showed up, with your coffee and your jokes and your way of making chaos feel like fun. And suddenly, I wanted more. I want more. Harper stared at him for a long moment, her eyes bright in the glow of the lights. Then, slowly, a smile curved her lips, warm, teasing, and full of something that made Carlton's pulse race. Well, she said softly. That's good to know. Carlton blinked. Good to know. Harper stepped closer, her gaze steady. Because I've been wondering when you were going to say it. Carlton's breath caught. You have. Oh yeah, Harper said, her grin widening. I mean, you've been looking at me like I'm a particularly fascinating tomato plant for weeks. Carlton laughed, loud, unguarded, and full of relief. That's not the comparison I was going for. Hey, Harper teased, her voice light. Tomatoes are versatile. Like me. Carlton shook his head, grinning like a fool. You're impossible. And you're late, Harper said, her tone playful but her eyes soft. But I'll forgive you. Then, before Carlton could respond, Harper closed the distance between them and kissed him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was warm and real and perfect, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long winter. Carlton kissed her back, his hands trembling slightly as they found hers. And for a moment, the world narrowed to the taste of her smile and the hum of the greenhouse lights. When they finally pulled apart, Harper rested her forehead against his, her voice a whisper. So, does this mean I get my own plot? Carlton laughed, breathless and happy. You can have the whole row. Harper grinned. Good answer. Chapter 12, Blooming Together. Spring arrived like a quiet miracle. The rooftop greenhouse was a riot of color now. Lush rows of lettuce and kale, vines heavy with ripening tomatoes, and bursts of flowers that drew bees in lazy spirals. Butterflies flitted through the air like living confetti, their wings catching the sunlight that streamed through the glass. The hum of life was everywhere, and Carlton Evans felt it in his bones. He stood near the center table, adjusting a tray of seedlings, when Harper appeared at his side. She wore a soft green sweater that matched the basil leaves, her hair loose and shining in the golden light. She slipped her hand into his without a word, and Carlton felt the familiar spark, the one that had turned his world upside down and made it better in every way. Looks good, Harper said, surveying the greenhouse with a smile. You've outdone yourself. Carlton squeezed her hand gently. We've outdone ourselves. Harper grinned. Fair point. The co-op had taken off like wildflowers in bloom. Tenants worked their plots with pride, swapping tips and recipes like seasoned gardeners. Mrs. Delgado had declared herself tomato queen and threatened to start charging royalties for salsa recipes. Marcus's daughter had painted a sign for the strawberry patch that read, "Very important zone." Even the bees had become minor celebrities, their hives decorated with tiny hand-painted flowers courtesy of the building's youngest residents. But the best part, the part that made Carlton's chest ache in the best way, was seeing his grandmother smile again. She came up to the rooftop that afternoon, leaning on her cane but moving with quiet determination. Carlton hurried to meet her, offering his arm, but she waved him off with a look that said, "I'm not fragile yet." "Well," she said, stepping into the greenhouse, her eyes sweeping over the vibrant rows. "Would you look at this?" Carlton watched her take it all in. The flowers, the vegetables, the laughter drifting from the far end where Harper was teaching Marcus how to prune basil without murdering it. His grandmother's eyes glistened, and Carlton felt his throat tighten. "You did this?" she said softly, turning to him. "You saved this place." Carlton shook his head. "We did this. Everyone helped." His grandmother smiled, her gaze warm and proud. "Your grandfather would have loved this." Carlton swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in his eyes. "I hope so." She reached up, cupping his cheek with a hand that had weathered decades of life and love. "You've given us more than a garden, Carlton. You've given us a family." The words landed deep, settling in the quiet spaces of his heart. He hugged her gently, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and home, and for a moment, everything felt exactly as it should. Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the greenhouse in shades of gold and rose, Carlton and Harper sat together at the center table, sharing a plate of strawberries fresh from the patch. Harper popped one into her mouth, her eyes closing in exaggerated bliss. "Best strawberries ever," she declared. "You should put that on a billboard." Carlton chuckled. "I'll add it to the marketing plan." Harper leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, and for a long moment, they just sat there, quiet, content, surrounded by the hum of life they'd built together. "You know," Harper said softly, her voice like sunlight breaking through clouds, "I think your grandmother was right." Carlton turned his head slightly. "About what?" "Good men need more than projects," Harper murmured, her fingers intertwining with his. "They need people." Carlton smiled, his chest warm and full. "Guess I found mine." Harper looked up, her eyes bright and steady. "Guess you did." And as the last light of day spilled across the rooftop, Carlton Evans realized something simple and profound. Love, like a garden, didn't need perfect conditions to grow. It just needed care, patience, and the courage to plant the first seed. Chapter 13 Epilogue. Love in bloom, summer had settled over the city like a warm embrace, and the rooftop greenhouse thrived in its golden glow. Rows of vegetables stretched in vibrant greens, tomatoes blushed red on their vines, and sunflowers stood tall like sentinels of joy. The hum of bees mingled with laughter as residents moved among the plots, baskets in hand, voices bright with easy camaraderie. The co-op had become more than Carlton ever imagined. It wasn't just a garden, it was a heartbeat. A place where neighbors shared recipes and stories, where children chased butterflies between rows of basil, where Mrs. Delgado held salsa-making workshops and Marcus's daughter proudly declared herself Queen of Strawberries. Even the pottery station had taken off, its shelves lined with colorful, imperfect creations that spoke of hands learning and hearts opening. And at the center of it all was Carlton Evans, no longer just the man who fixed leaky faucets and dreamed of green rooftops, but the man who had built something lasting, something beautiful, something that had changed his life in ways he hadn't dared hope for. He stood on the rooftop that evening. The city sprawled in dusky hues beyond the glass walls. The greenhouse shimmered under strings of lights, casting warm halos over the tables where a few tenants lingered, chatting softly. Carlton's gaze drifted to Harper, who was arranging a bouquet of wildflowers in a clay vase she'd made herself. Her hair caught the light like spun gold, her smile easy and unguarded. When she looked up and saw him watching, her grin widened. "You're staring," she teased, walking toward him with the flowers in hand. "Guilty," Carlton said, his voice low but steady. "Can you blame me?" Harper laughed, the sound soft and bright. "Flattery will get you everywhere." She handed him the vase, her fingers brushing his, a touch that still sent sparks racing through him, even now. Carlton set the flowers on the table, then turned back to her, his heart full. "Do you ever think," he said quietly, "about how this all started? One idea, one empty rooftop." Harper stepped closer, her eyes warm, "and one man stubborn enough to make it happen." Carlton smiled, his chest tightening in the best way. "Couldn't have done it without you." "Good," Harper said, her voice playful but her gaze steady. "Because you're stuck with me now." Carlton laughed, pulling her gently into his arms. "Best deal I ever made." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in the glow of the greenhouse, the hum of life around them like music. Beyond the glass, the city lights flickered, but up here, the world felt small and perfect, a garden blooming against the odds, and a love that had taken root in the most unexpected soil. As the stars began to prick the sky, Carlton kissed Harper softly, tasting the sweetness of strawberries and something deeper, something that promised seasons of growth and joy. And in that quiet, golden moment, he knew this was home.